I am an heir, not your caregiver. My daughter refused to pay for a caregiver and used my money for a trip. In the end, she abandoned me, and what she doesn't know is that I sold her house to get my revenge. The worn leather of my armchair conformed to my aging frame, a familiar comfort in a life that had grown increasingly uncomfortable. Outside, the São Paulo sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn, a stark contrast to the gloom that had settled in my heart. For years I had poured my lifeblood into building a comfortable existence for my family. My hands, now gnarled with age, still remembered the grit of the factory floor, the endless nights spent poring over blueprints, the cautious optimism of early investments that had thankfully paid off. And for whom? That was the question that echoed in the quiet corners of this house, a house that now felt more like a gilded cage than a home. Clara, my only daughter, had always been spirited. As a child, it was endearing, a flash of independence. But as she grew, that spirit morphed into something sharp-edged, something that seemed to prioritize her own desires above all else. I had always been a patient father, perhaps too patient. I had excused her youthful indiscretions, funded her various ventures, most of which fizzled out spectacularly, and offered a listening ear even when her complaints seemed trivial in the grand scheme of things. My wife, God rest her soul, had always been the firmer one. But since her passing 5 years ago, I felt the balance in our family shift precariously. The subtle shift in Clara's demeanor towards me began insidiously. Initially, it was just a lack of regular visits, excuses about her busy life, her demanding job as some sort of marketing executive. Then came the financial requests, always framed as temporary help, a bridge between paychecks and unmissable investment opportunity. Being a father, and perhaps a foolish one, I always obliged. My pension was more than enough for my simple needs, and what was money for if not to help your children? The real turning point, the moment when the scales finally fell from my eyes, involved my increasing need for assistance. Age, as it inevitably does, had begun to catch up. My knees ached, my vision blurred, and the simple tasks of daily life were becoming increasingly challenging. I broached the subject of a part-time caregiver with Clara, expecting a degree of understanding, perhaps even concern. Her response still felt like a physical blow. A caregiver, Pi? Honestly, the expense. We're not exactly swimming in money here. This from the woman who sported designer handbags and took weekend trips to the coast. When I gently reminded her of the modest inheritance she had received from her mother, a sum that could easily cover such an expense, her tone hardened. That money is for our future, Pi, for emergencies. Apparently, her aging father's well-being didn't qualify as an emergency. The callousness stung, but what followed was even more infuriating. A few weeks later, Clara announced her plans for a much-needed 3-week vacation to Europe. Pictures flooded my phone. Clara posing in front of ancient ruins, sipping wine in Parisian cafes, looking carefree and utterly oblivious to the fact that her own father was struggling to reach the top shelf in his kitchen. And then I saw it. A credit card statement left carelessly on the dining table during one of her rare visits to pick up mail. A significant portion of her European escapade had been funded by charges to my supplementary credit card, a card I had given her years ago for emergencies, a card she had assured me she rarely used. The audacity of it took my breath away. She was not only refusing to contribute to my care, she was actively siphoning away my resources for her own pleasure. The final blow came a few months later. I had a minor fall in the bathroom and lay on the cold tiles for what felt like an eternity before I could reach my emergency pendant. When Clara finally arrived at the hospital, her concern seemed perfunctory at best. After a few days of cursory visits, she announced that she had a crucial work project and couldn't stay any longer. She made some vague promises about arranging more regular home care, kissed me on the forehead with a distinct lack of warmth, and then she was gone. She abandoned me in that sterile hospital room, leaving me feeling utterly alone and disposable. Lying there, staring at the bland ceiling, something inside me shifted. The years of patient understanding, the ingrained desire to always put my daughter first, finally snapped. The hurt solidified into a cold, hard resolve. I was not a burden to be shuffled aside, a resource to be exploited. I was Elias, a man who had built a life, who had earned his dignity, and I would not let it be taken from me. As the days turned into weeks and Clara's promised home care remained a distant promise, a plan began to form in my mind. It was a quiet, insidious plan, born not of rage but of a deep sense of injustice. I spent my days making phone calls, consulting with an old friend who was a lawyer, meticulously gathering information. My outward demeanor remained the same. A slightly frail, somewhat resigned old man, but inside a storm was brewing. A storm of quiet determination that would soon unleash its fury on those who had so carelessly underestimated me. They thought I was weak, dependent, easily forgotten. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The sterile scent of the lawyer's office was a stark contrast to the familiar aroma of old wood and lemon polish in my study. Dr. Almeida, a man I had known for decades, listened intently as I laid out my plan, his eyebrows occasionally arching in surprise, but his expression remaining professional. I had chosen him specifically for his discretion and his understanding of the intricacies of Brazilian property law. Years ago, in my more prosperous days, I had helped Dr. Almeida establish his practice with a small, timely loan. Now I was calling in that quiet debt. The property on Rua das Flores, Dr. Almeida confirmed, adjusting his spectacles. The one you gifted to your daughter, Clara? But the title remained in my name. A safety net I had always intended it to be. One never knows what the future holds. I omitted the fact that the safety net was originally intended to protect Clara, not myself from her. Dr. Almeida nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. Legally, you have every right to sell the property, Elias. The documentation is clear, however. He paused, his gaze direct. Are you certain this is the path you wish to take? It will undoubtedly cause significant family discord. This, I gestured vaguely. This is merely the crescendo. Almeida's guidance, the process of listing the house began. I instructed the real estate agent to handle everything discreetly. No open houses, only private viewings for serious buyers. I even managed to declutter the house myself, packing away Clara's belongings with a strange mix of detachment and a lingering sadness for the daughter she used to be. Each item I touched, a faded photograph, a chipped teacup, was a ghost of happier times, a stark reminder of how things had soured. Throughout this period, Clara remained blissfully unaware. Her phone calls became even less frequent, usually centered around some minor request or complaint. Once she called to berate me for misplacing a valuable antique vase, a cheap trinket she had picked up at a flea market, her voice laced with impatience. The irony was thick enough to choke on. Here I was, systematically dismantling her life as she knew it, and she was worried about a worthless vase. Her arrogance was astounding. During one of her fleeting visits, ostensibly to check on me, though she spent most of the time on her phone, she even had the audacity to suggest I consider updating my will, subtly hinting at her inheritance. I simply smiled thinly and nodded, making vague noises of agreement, all the while knowing that the very ground beneath her feet was about to be sold. There were moments, I confess, when a pang of guilt would strike me. Memories of Clara as a little girl, her bright eyes and infectious laughter, would flicker through my mind, but then I would remember the coldness in her voice when she refused to help with a caregiver, the casual way she had used my credit card, the utter abandonment in that hospital room. The guilt would recede, replaced by the unwavering conviction that I was doing what I had to do to reclaim my dignity. The day the offer came in, a solid all-cash offer above the asking price, I felt a strange sense of calm. Dr. Almeida called me with the news, his voice measured. It's done, Elias. The paperwork is finalized. The funds will be transferred to your account tomorrow. The gears of my plan were now fully in motion. The storm was no longer brewing, it was about to break. Clara would soon learn that an aging father, seemingly frail and forgotten, could still wield a considerable amount of power when pushed to his breaking point. The inheritance she so eagerly anticipated was about to take a very unexpected turn, and I, Elias, would finally have my peace. The crisp white envelope felt heavy in my trembling hand. Inside was a letter from Dr. Almeida's office, the official notification of the sale of the property on Rua das Flores. It was time. I picked up the phone, my fingers hovering over Clara's number. For a fleeting moment, the old paternal instincts resurfaced, a desire to cushion the blow. But the memory of her dismissive tone, her selfish actions, hardened my resolve. I dialed her number. It rang several times before she answered, her voice rushed and impatient. What is it, Pi? I'm in a meeting. I have some news regarding the house on Rua das Flores. What about it? Her tone was laced with a hint of possessiveness, as if the house was already hers. I have sold it, I stated simply, allowing the words to hang in the air. The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, the slow realization dawning on her. Then the dam broke. You what? You can't do that. That's my house. Her voice was shrill, laced with disbelief and rising hysteria. No, Clara, I corrected her gently. It was always my house. I gifted it to you for your use, but the title remained in my name. As such, I am perfectly within my rights to sell it. She called me cruel, vindictive, senile. She reminded me of all the sacrifices she had supposedly made for me, sacrifices that existed only in her imagination. She demanded to know where she and her husband would live. How could I do this to them? I listened patiently, allowing her to vent her fury. When she finally paused for breath, I spoke again, my voice firm but devoid of anger. Clara, for years I have tried to be a good father. I have supported you, forgiven your mistakes, and always put your needs before my own. But your recent behavior, your refusal to contribute to my care, your selfish use of my money, and ultimately, your abandonment of me, has shown me a profound lack of respect and consideration. You saw me as a burden, a resource to be exploited. You assumed I would always be here, always providing, always forgiving. You were wrong. Her tone shifted from rage to panic. She pleaded, she cajoled, she even tried to feign concern for my well-being, but her words rang hollow. The realization that her perceived inheritance, her safety net, had been snatched away, was clearly the driving force behind her sudden distress. The consequences for Clara were swift and devastating. She and her husband were forced to move out of the house within a matter of weeks. Their comfortable lifestyle, built in part on the assumption of inheriting my assets, began to crumble. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they were facing financial difficulties and that their relationship was strained under the pressure. I, on the other hand, found a newfound peace in my new surroundings. The retirement community was clean, well-maintained, and filled with people my own age. I made new friends, rekindled old hobbies, and finally had the time and freedom to focus on my own well-being. The constant worry about being a burden was gone, replaced by a sense of quiet satisfaction. Occasionally, Clara would call, her voice still tinged with resentment, but now also with a note of desperation. I would listen politely, but my heart no longer ached with guilt. I had done what I needed to do. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity. The poetic justice of it all was not lost on me. Clara's greed and her assumption of entitlement had ultimately led to her own downfall. The house she had likely envisioned as her future inheritance was now the very instrument of her financial distress. She had looked at me, her aging father, and seen only a means to an end. She had failed to see the quiet strength that still resided within me. The determination of a man who had worked hard his entire life and would not be dismissed or exploited in his final years. As I sit here now, in the sun-drenched common room of my new home, surrounded by the laughter and chatter of my peers, I feel a profound sense of peace. The weight that had been pressing down on me for so long has finally lifted. I am an heir to my own life, and I have finally taken control of my inheritance, my dignity, my peace of mind, and the right to live my remaining years with respect. And sometimes late at night I allow myself a small, satisfied smile when I think of the storm that swept through Clara's life, a storm entirely of her own making.